How would you like a 15% discount to my daily email, the stack of stuff, the show notes, discounts to the conference, all of that? All you need to do is text the word show to 33777. You'll get the annual subscription with a 15% discount to my daily email. You'll get the stack of stuff, the links to the show notes, discounts to the conference, and so much more. All you have to do is text the word show, SHOW, to 33777. Text show to 33777.
Welcome to the Eric Erickson Show podcast, Hour 1.
Hello, America. Welcome. It is Eric Erickson here across the United States. I am delighted to have you with me. The phone number is 877-973-7425. Should you wish to be on the program, per usual, text Eric, E-R-I-C-K, to 33777. Get the live stream, the show notes, everything you need to stick with the show. We've got to begin, actually, not with tariffs. Now, I got to note real quick. So the whole reason I took off Friday was because the Supreme Court had released their schedule, and they weren't going to do decisions last week, but they were this week. And I thought, I'll be safe. The tariff decision won't come out. And then they changed the schedule. Of course they would do this to me. And I would start with the tariffs, except for what happened yesterday. The United States beat Canada in hockey. And I have to say, so I went to Las Vegas by myself. No, there's a place about 2 hours north of me called Barnsley Gardens. And I love it. And normally I would go there by myself and I could play golf. And I thought, you know what? I want to go to Vegas. I've never been by myself before. I always take people with me. Turns out I am a personality that does not like to be in a place like Las Vegas by myself. I basically sat around my hotel room and did nothing, which was fine. I did get a very nice massage. I still have a bruise. Good Lord. The massage therapist, like my calves, they went a little bit too aggressively, but that's okay. It was nice to get away on Saturday. Some friends came into town, and then I had a lot of fun having friends in Las Vegas. We went to the Grand Canyon and stuff like that. Anyway, I'm too introverted to be in a place like that by myself. But nonetheless, while I was there, I watched the U.S. Croatia or Slovakia hockey game. And it was like being there. They had it on all the screens, and the crowd went insane. People chanting USA, USA. And then the hockey game, it was 5 a.m. My time out in Vegas when it started, but it was still going on when I woke up. And I went downstairs and got off the elevator and could hear the roar of people in there. I'm like, what on earth is going on out here? And it was the hockey game. It was incredible to watch this game there with this live audience. It genuinely was a wild time to be in a casino in Las Vegas. A buddy of mine was at the craps table at 1 a.m. The game started at 5 as he was winding down. He's like, I got to stay up. So he never left the craps table. He could see the game from where he was. It was just he never got to sleep. He slept on the way home. I want to start there with this because as someone who does spoken word audio for a living and has no script, as you can probably tell today, Mike Tirico is one of the best broadcasters in America, sports broadcaster for NBC. After that game was over, summing up the Olympics, this is Tirico.
Because of a drought that almost lasted a half century, those teams are revered. They are held on to forever. And what happened today doesn't take away from the greatness of those teams or the meaning that those teams have in U.S. hockey. But what you saw today was the build of a generation, inspired perhaps by that team that lost in 2010 in Vancouver to the Sidney Crosby golden goal in overtime. Or the team where TJ Oshie had all those shootout goals in 2014. That's when these guys were doing what you're doing, watching on TV. And they were young, and they were living the dream. So for all the young people out there, not just the hockey, but all the Olympics you've watched, Those dreams are formed now. Go chase them and go get them, because our country loves sports and it brings us together unlike anything else. And if you didn't know that, and if you haven't been watching the last 2 weeks, you saw it in Team USA Hockey, winning the gold over their arch rival Canada here in Milan to wrap up these 25th Olympic Winter Games.
Now, he said something that I need to dwell on with you, and this is why I'm starting the show here today and not with tariffs. He says sports brings this country together unlike anything else, and he's right. And over the last number of years, major leagues have been trying to incorporate in politics. So you got two soccer teams. You've got the soccer team that had Megan Rapinoe, and you've got the soccer team that has Jack Hughes. And the soccer team with Jack Hughes actually plays on a smaller field on ice with skates on, but it's ice soccer essentially. But it's fantastic to watch. I love watching hockey. Ice hockey is a lot of fun. I mean, it's like wrestling and soccer on ice combined. They make it exciting. Megan Rapinoe could not help but lecture her fellow Americans. And as a result, a lot of Americans were turned off by it. It's like watching the NBA. They can lecture Americans on civil rights, but keep their mouths shut when it comes to China. Jack Hughes is Jewish, so I'm sure Tucker Carlson was rooting for the Canadians. He got his teeth knocked out on the ice and then scores for the United States. They win the match. It was incredible. The tank of a goalie for the Americans was incredible. To be honest with you, the Canadians seemed to play better than the Americans on the ice, but we had a better goalie. And the crowd went wild. But do you know Tim Walz, the governor of Minnesota, on Blue Sky, because that's where the left goes now instead of Twitter, on Blue Sky, Tim Walz cheered on the American team, and he got lectured by progressives. Progressives had a meltdown that the Democratic governor of Minnesota rooted for the United States. The Huffington Post, the left-wing site, the Huffington Post, had a piece up that if you don't feel like cheering for the United States, you're not alone. Gallup, which is getting out of more and more polling these days, continues to maintain a polling piece on patriotism in the United States. And what you find is that it doesn't matter whether a Democrat's a president or a Republican is president. Republicans always have a sense of patriotism that hovers around 85 to 90%. With Democrats, on the other hand, their patriotism is measured by who is in the White House. When a Democrat is in the White House, Democrats feel patriotic about the United States. And when a Republican is president, Democrats do not. Patriotism of Democrats has plunged. Again, it's always pretty steady among Republicans, regardless of who the president is. But among Democrats, it's transactional patriotism. It's ironic for Donald Trump to be a very transactional president. I mean, whoever curries favor with him gets in good. Those who criticize him don't. There's no even keel there. It's up and down, depending on where you stand with him. And the Democrats behave when it comes to patriotism, much as they accuse Donald Trump of behaving, very transactionally. When Democrats have power, they love the country. When they don't have power, they hate the country. Republicans, they don't care who has power. They love the United States. The media regularly props up the elitist professional and amateur athletes of the Olympics who lecture the United States. NBC News is the American broadcaster of the Olympic Games. The job of NBC is to cover the American Olympic Games, to broadcast for us. If you watch the Olympics in Great Britain, they are singularly focused on the British teams. In Australia, the Australian teams. In Italy, the Italian teams. In France, the French teams. NBC News went overboard in its promotions of Eileen Gu, who is a paid for by the Chinese communist trader who decided for money to do the Olympics for the Chinese Communist Party. And NBC News went overboard in promotions of this Chinese communist athlete who was not playing for the American team. And they made it some sort of big deal. It was like the NBA players who want to ignore the Uyghurs were in charge of NBC sporting broadcasts so they could lecture Americans. Thank God Mike Tirico saved it for NBC. Meanwhile, on the left, they couldn't understand why conservatives would cheer for Alyssa Liu. Alyssa Liu is a progressive ice figure skater. She has participated in protests against the United States. She has participated in anti-ice protests. She hates Donald Trump. She's lectured Americans on diversity, and conservatives went wild for her winning the gold medal. And progressives, who again, they only are patriotic when they're in charge of the country, they couldn't understand why conservatives would root for Alyssa Liu knowing her politics. The fact that people on the left can't understand why you and I would root for an American gold medal winner because of her politics is a damning indictment on the psychology of the left these days, where everything is wrapped in the emotional zeal of politics. And if you don't share their politics, they can't like you. They couldn't cheer for Team USA hockey. They felt guilty doing so because they don't like the country right now because they're not in charge of it. They wanted to root for the Canadians. In fact, on social media, multiple progressive stars were lecturing the rest of us on the jingoism of rooting for Team USA, that the righteous among us would root for Canada. No righteous person would root for America's top hat. If you're an American, you root for the Americans. But the left, they don't see themselves as Americans unless they're in charge. There has been this noxiousness in sporting events over the last number of years. It's one of the reasons the NBA ratings are down so much, is the incorporation of woke progressive politics into so much. NFL ratings went down when Colin Kaepernick took his knee, and the rest of them decided to start embracing it, and people started turning off the NFL. They finally, for the most part, got over it. Goodell still weaves in just enough progressivism so that the left will come back. I know some conservatives who, after Colin Kaepernick, they tuned out the NFL and they won't come back to it. They've got as much grace as the atheists. But you got Rapinoe out there who lectured Americans. She got beaten by middle school boys. And you know what, Alyssa Liu? Unlike Eileen Gu, who was paid by the communist Chinese to ski for them, the Liu family were harassed and hounded and targeted by the Chinese communists. They fled the Chinese communists. The Chinese communists have gone after that family. And Alyssa Liu and I, we don't see eye to eye on politics, but she wrapped herself in the American flag and said how much she loved this country. Unlike Eileen Gu, who NBC News decided to elevate in profile and promotion, who wrapped herself in the Chinese Communist flag. Alyssa Gu loves this country. The hockey players for the United States, they love this country. They were pro-America. It is the progressives in this country who have this mental health problem where they can't like this country if they're not in charge of it. And they can say it's all about Trump, but they did the same thing when George W. Bush was president as well. They hated this country. I know a progressive. I think she's still in business. She's a lesbian writer from San Francisco who, after 9/11 in 2001, told me she thought it was childish to see people flying American flags. In fact, there were stories at the time in various liberal publications about how so many people rushing to fly the American flag made them feel uncomfortable with George W. Bush's warmongering. The same people now. The president has changed, but the letter after his name remains the same, and that means it's not their guy, so they don't like the country. They feel left out of the country because they aren't in charge of it. I don't like that the president is bullying Netflix over Susan Rice, telling them that they need to get rid of her. But you know what I really don't like is Susan Rice lecturing Americans that we need some sort of punishment for people who supported Donald Trump. The left is hell-bent on taking back power in this country and punishing anyone who supported Donald Trump. It's all about power for them, and they believe their denial of power is illegitimate. They can't bring themselves to root for the American hockey team. They can't bring themselves to root for Americans winning gold medals. They can't bring themselves to support a country they're not in charge of, which means they really are transactional patriots, which really means they aren't patriotic. They're about themselves. The rest of us this weekend, we were about Team USA. watching them win, sporting events bringing us together, Americans crushing the Canadians and the Chinese, outperforming them all, bringing the very best of the game, the very best of sportsmanlike conduct, the very best of this country. We should all be proud of them, regardless of their politics. Hello and welcome. It is Eric Erickson here. Tucker Carlson is apparently at the White House today. Laura Loomer says he wishes to explain himself to the president. If you haven't seen the interview that Tucker Carlson conducted with Mike Huckabee, it was a disaster for Tucker Carlson. They've had to exert as much of it as possible to try to make Tucker Carlson look good. And at the end of the day, he just doesn't look good in the interview. He was outmaneuvered by Mike Huckabee, who knows his stuff. You know, one of the talking points of the anti-Semites led by Tucker Carlson these days is that Qatar has many more Christians than Israel does. And on the surface, that's true. But in Israel, they can be citizens of the country. They vote. They can freely worship. There are Easter parades. And in Qatar, they're all expats imported to work in the country. They're not allowed to worship in public. Their churches are in compounds and can't have bells and things like stained glass windows. They are persecuted by the state if they worship in public. And yet the Qataris, who are throwing a lot of money around this country these days, don't want you to know the level of Christian persecution in Qatar. And Tucker Carlson is happy to build the myth for them. Interestingly enough, I think that it would be a disaster for Paramount to buy Warner Brothers because Paramount is being funded by Qatar. And if you understand the deep ruthlessness of the Qatari regime in their propaganda effort, they are backed by the Muslim Brotherhood and using money to spread in the West a false narrative of Qatar to blind us to their jihadi ways. I don't think Paramount should be allowed anywhere near the entire volume of works held by Warner Brothers. Qatar is bad news, people. Now, we got to move on. But before we do, I got to tell you about my Eden Pure Thunderstorm, which I had with me this weekend, and I didn't use it, didn't have to use it because my hotel room was fine, but I had it with me just in case. The Eden Pure Thunderstorm, you can get 3 of them and save $200. You can get a money-back guarantee if they don't wipe out your odors, but they will wipe out your odors. I've used them in rental cars, my back porch. I've used them in hotel rooms to wipe out smoke odors. It's fantastic. EdenPureDeals.com. You put in the discount code ERIC3, ERICK3, at EdenPureDeals.com, and you, my friends, will have the air of your home clean. It won't stink. It's an air purifier, too, so it gets rid of dust, pollen, and pet dander. It also gets rid of 99.9% of bacteria and viruses, and it just works. You plug it in, it works. You can power it with a USB cord. You can power it, plug it into the wall. You get 3 of them upstairs, downstairs, your basement, your travel bag, your RV, wherever you need them. They're small. They're highly portable. I keep one in my travel bag, and they will wipe out odors. EdenPureDeals.com. The discount code ERIC3, ERICK3. When we come back, everything you need to know about the tariff decision and where we go from here. And don't look at the markets today because they're reacting to Trump's latest moves. Welcome back. It is Eric Erickson here. The phone number 877-973-7425 is the phone number. At the top of the next hour, y'all, is someone who I have never met and have wanted to meet is going to join me on the program. Alireza Jafazadeh is an Iranian dissident, and if you know the name, it's because he is the person who exposed Iran's nuclear program that the president blew up. And he's going to join me at the top of the next hour. I figure someone who actually is more familiar with Iran than me and can give us the breakdown on what's happening as the USS Gerald Ford heads in that direction to join the Lincoln. The Gerald Ford is now in the Mediterranean, headed towards Iran as more and more people believe the president's going to strike. I talking to someone who is one of the actual dissidents with an amazing intelligence network inside Iran would be useful for all of us. So Alireza Jafazadeh will be at the top of the hour with me. Right now, I want to talk about the tariffs. If you're a regular listener, and listen, I try not to be super braggadocious. Occasionally, my ego can get away from me. and I recognize that. But this case was argued in the United States Supreme Court. The tariff case got argued by the Trump administration in the United States Supreme Court in November of last year. The decision came out Friday. And if you listen to my program, it is the only conservative talk show in America that in November of last year told you exactly how the case was going to be decided by the United States Supreme Court. I told you the day of the argument how the case was going to be decided. The only surprise in my mind is that it was not unanimous, but I told you exactly the way the case was going to be decided. And so if you have listened to me on this program, you were more informed than anyone listening to any other conservative talk show in America or listening to Fox News or anything else. How did the Supreme Court arrive at their decision? To say that the president's tariffs under IEEPA were unconstitutional. What I told you in November was what I will tell you now. In the history of U.S. Supreme Court decisions, they have been very, very clear that when Congress delegates one of its Article 1, Section 8 powers to the president, Congress must be clear on that designation. Under IEEPA, the president has powers. And one of the powers is to regulate trade. Regulating trade can include embargoes. In Brett Kavanaugh's dissent, he points out that essentially you're saying the president can impose a trade embargo, but not a tariff. You can impose an extreme action, not a more reasonable action. Yes, and here's why. If you were to go to Article 1, Section 8 of the United States Constitution, those are the enumerated powers. Article 1, Section 8, Clause 1, the Congress shall have the power to lay and collect taxes, duties, imposts, and excises, to pay the debts and provide for the common defense and general welfare of the United States, but all duties, imposts, and excises shall be uniform throughout the United States. Clause 2, the Congress shall have the power to borrow money on the credit of the United States. Clause 3, the Congress shall have the power to regulate commerce with foreign nations and among the several states and with the Indian tribes. If you read the IEEPA statute, it says the president shall have the power to regulate commerce with foreign nations, essentially. That's Article 1, Section 8, Clause 3. It does not say the president shall have the power to impose duties or tariffs. That's Article 1, Section 8, Clause 1. Because it doesn't say the president has the power to impose duties or tariffs, but it says the president has the power to essentially regulate trade with other countries. That's Clause 3. Then Congress very clearly did not authorize the president to impose the taxing power. They didn't delegate the taxing power to the president under IEEPA. In other statutes, they did. And I told you again in November that there were other statutes where Congress clearly gave the president the power to impose tariffs. And John Roberts pointed out in his decision that compare IEEPA to several of these other trade pieces of legislation. The president can impose national security tariffs, which he did, which are still legally binding. The president could impose a balance of receipts tariffs. The problem with that one, though, and this is where the president has gotten wrong now, is the Dow is down over 800 points today because the president has decided now to impose unilateral global 15% tariffs, which he can do under Section 122 of the Trade Act. Here's the problem. The president's new way to impose tariffs is through a statute that the president's lawyers argued in the Supreme Court is no longer applicable under current law. There is something called judicial estoppel. You lawyers listening right now are familiar with judicial estoppel. For those of you who don't know what judicial estoppel is, it comes in a variety of forms, but here's one of the very specific forms. Lawyers for a client are bound by the prior arguments they've made in prior cases, unless the situation has changed. So if you as a lawyer go to court and tell the court that my client has no power to do X, Y, and Z, and then your client seeks later to do something that you just argued he couldn't do, you are bound by your prior statements in court. Section 122 of the Trade Act of 1974 allows the president to impose tariffs if there is a balance of payment deficit between the United States and other nations. As Donald Trump's lawyers argued in the Supreme Court, that law is still on the books, but it no longer is applicable. Because Section 122 balance of payment deficit tariffs apply to sustained drawdowns of foreign reserve currencies and the Bretton Woods Protocol for currency management. We are no longer under the Bretton Woods protocols that we used to be in the country. As a result, we no longer deal with balance of payment deficits. We don't have a balance of payment deficit that the law applies to. As a result, this section no longer applies, and this is very important whether you believe me or not. What you need to understand is that in the United States Supreme Court, you don't have to believe me. You can go read the transcript for yourself. Section 122 came up, and President Trump's own Solicitor General told the United States Supreme Court that Section 122 may still be on the books, but the United States no longer runs balance of payment deficits because we do our currency differently, and as a result, Section 122 doesn't apply and can't be used by the president. And so it was a surprise to everyone on Friday afternoon when the president announced he would impose global 15% tariffs based on Section 122. Having previously argued in court, Section 122 is no longer applicable. There are tariffs the president can impose, by the way. The president can and has imposed national security-related tariffs. Those tariffs still exist. The other problem for the president is exactly what I told you in November and since, that when the president in his public statements has said, for example, he increased tariffs on Canada because he didn't like an advertisement. He increased tariffs on Switzerland because he didn't like the way the premier of Switzerland talked to him. Those aren't emergency tariffs. Those are tariffs on whims. And the Supreme Court can't be immune from taking those statements into consideration, and it appears that they did. The president has handled this badly. Tariffs are deeply unpopular, except among the president's hardcore base. And when you probe the president's hardcore base, even they will begrudgingly acknowledge tariffs aren't good policy in most cases. They certainly would be opposed if Kamala Harris did them. And that gets me to Clarence Thomas, who I'm just deeply ashamed of Clarence Thomas's decision, because you know and I know, and if you read Clarence Thomas, you pretty much can get the fact that Brett Kavanaugh, Sam Alito, and Clarence Thomas would have been in the majority if Kamala Harris did what Donald Trump did. And Elena Kagan, Ketanji Brown Jackson, and Sonia Sotomayor would have been in the minority. In fact, this is Neil Gorsuch's entire concurring opinion in the case. In fact, my suspicion is the reason it took the Supreme Court so long to issue this case is because Justice Neil Gorsuch decided to settle scores. Gorsuch takes all of them to task for their intellectual dishonesty, and Gorsuch is right. Neil Gorsuch points out that Ketanji Brown Jackson, Sonia Sotomayor, and Elena Kagan were willing to embrace the major questions doctrine to say that Donald Trump couldn't impose tariffs, and he chronicled their entire history of being dismissive of the major questions doctrine until now. And Neil Gorsuch chronicles how Sam Alito, Brett Kavanaugh, and Clarence Thomas embraced the major questions doctrine every time they stopped Joe Biden, and now are like, it doesn't really apply here. It's like, how does a major question of trade imbalances and tariffs not be a major question of Congress when the statute is unclear? And the basic premise of the major questions doctrine is that if the statute is unclear, you cannot say that Congress gave the president the power to do something. That's the major questions doctrine. The regulatory state nor the president have the power to do the thing unless Congress makes it explicitly clear. And here, Kagan and Sotomayor and Jackson were like, it's not clear, major questions. Alito, Thomas, and Guy were like, it's very, very clear to us. There's no major question doctrine. And Gorsuch is like, a pox on all of you. You're all a bunch of disingenuous liars. And he's right. Clarence Thomas should be ashamed of himself for his dissent, which I read. Kavanaugh's dissent is pathetic. And here's the way I read it. If you want to understand the case, if you want to understand Clarence Thomas's dissent in the tariff case, here's how I read Clarence Thomas's dissent. Mr. President, I'm about to retire. Please pick someone just like me. That's Clarence Thomas's dissent, with Sam Alito concurring, who is also going to retire. That's what you need to know. I personally believe in reading Clarence Thomas's dissent. It's so vapid and poorly written and argued that Clarence Thomas actually agreed with the majority, and he understands he's about to retire and he needs to get one of his acolytes on the Supreme Court who later can reject the president's tariff argument. Now, that may be my wishful thinking, but his dissent was one of the shallowest dissents I've read in the Supreme Court, and I've read Ketanji Brown Jackson's dissents. Clarence Thomas had got to have been embarrassed by writing what he wrote, but if it was to preserve a conservative majority on the Supreme Court at a time the president is not taking advice from Leonard Leo, probably he needed to do that. That's my guess. Let me tell you something you're not talking about, though, and it's not getting a lot of talk from Republicans. Republicans are too scared to bring it up right now. Farmer bankruptcies are skyrocketing. Why are farmers going bankrupt at an alarming rate? Here in the Middle District of Georgia, where I live, our local bankruptcy court is flooded with farmers filing bankruptcy. They couldn't sell their soybeans last year. Despite the president claiming China was going to buy soybeans, China never actually bought the soybeans. Farmers don't have money to plant this year. Farmers in this country are going bankrupt because of the president's tariffs. And you can be mad at me for telling you the God's honest truth, but it's the God's honest truth. And you go read the bankruptcies and you go talk to the farmers who still support the president, and they will tell you that President Trump's tariffs were economic ruination for farmers who cannot sell their crops on foreign markets right now. And as a result, they can't get money and they're going bankrupt. And they still support the president, but they are furious about what his tariffs have done to them. And Republicans are too scared to tell you this because Republicans in a campaign year don't want to anger the president of the United States. But the fact of the matter is, in bankruptcy courts around the country, farmers are filing bankruptcies at an alarming rate because of the president's tariffs, because China and other countries stopped buying our crops in response to the president's tariffs. And the president's response is to double down on tariffs. The Democrats are announcing that about 2/3 of their anti-Republican ads this year will be about the tariffs. Why? Because the old don't like them, the young don't like them, Democrats don't like them, independents don't like them, Republicans don't like them, men don't like them, women don't like them. The only demographic of people in this country who support President Trump's tariffs are his most diehard supporters, and they are in a distinct minority. The president has found himself on the 30% side of a 70-30 issue. He's been very good about putting the Democrats on the 30 and 20% side of 70-30 and 80-20 issues. He's found himself on that. And the most gobsmacking thing about all of this is a man with no governing principle is somehow dogmatically convinced that the economic policies of the 19th century are somehow the saving grace of our economy when he's caused a bunch of farmers to go bankrupt. This is on the president of the United States, and he is foolish to double down on the tariffs, and yet he's going to. And you Republicans who support him should be raising Cain with him over this, because it's not only economically destructive, it's going to kill the Republicans at the ballot box while wiping out our farmers. And yet you're too scared to be honest with the president. Hello there. Welcome. It is Eric Erickson here. This hour of the program brought to you by Van Allen Golf. VanAllenGolf.com is the website. I wound up having to cancel my golf outing in Vegas, I was excited to take my Van Allen golf putter out there. If you or someone you love is into golf, you need to check them out, vanallengolf.com. You can also text golf to 33777. I'll send you a link. Look at them on Instagram, Van Allen Golf, and it's ALLEN, vanallengolf.com. Y'all, their equipment is just absolutely staggeringly impressive. And I say this as someone who's been skeptical of the high-end golf equipment market. Wow. It's fantastic. I want to dive into the Gavin Newsom stuff here later, but I do want to correct the record. And I got to say something in defense of Gavin Newsom. There is this video surfacing of him with the mayor of Atlanta. He's at a book signing, and people are saying, oh, he was talking to a black crowd in Georgia. It's not true. The crowd was overwhelmingly white. It was Pete Buttigieg levels of whiteness that he was talking to. And we should be truthful about this, that it was not a white or it was not a black crowd that he was talking to. So I will get into it though later. I got the audio, and it's kind of wild to see. By the way, one last point on the Supreme Court. For all the people on the left who've insisted the Supreme Court is in the pocket of Donald Trump, you really have beclowned yourselves after this tariff decision. You really, really have. Now, let me tell you about Incogni. A miracle happened to me on Friday. I use Incogni, I-N-C-O-G-N-I, I-N-C-O-G-N-I, Incogni. I use them. I started using them before they were an advertiser. Incogni.com/Eric. You can go sign up with them. On Friday, I got 0 spam calls. I had been, after buying a car a few months ago, I've been overwhelmed with spam calls, and that's why I signed up with Incogni. That, and I discovered that a data broker had tied me to my children's social media accounts, and it was all for sale for people to find for family harassment, and that's why I signed up with Incogni. And I still had one persistent call about loans from Caroline. And it was all AI generated, you could tell. And I finally kept flagging the number. Incogni figured out who it was and kept persisting, sending them takedown notices of my information. And on Friday, for the first time in a while, I have not gotten a single spam call. Incogni.com/Eric is where you want to go. They can shut this down for you. Save 60%. Incogni.com/Eric. Incogni.com/ERICK.